A few years ago, I had a job interview in cricket. And one of the questions was, if I was in charge of a T20 team and we won the toss, regardless of conditions and players and all that sort of thing, what would I do? And I said, bat first. And the people on the call did a double take. Everyone knows you bowl first in T20 cricket, and I was breaking some ancient covenant by even suggesting that you might not do that. Here you can see how often teams actually win, whether they're batting first or second in T20 cricket. See, it was pretty close at the start, and then we got to a period where batting first actually didn't work all that well. And then, of recent times, that's changed again. But certainly from 2016 until 2021, it made sense for teams to get a little bit more obsessed with bowling first automatically. But 2022, I just want to bring this one up for a minute, because you'll see something quite weird happened here. I think this is a very, very interesting year, because you can see here that it was very rare for a team to win the toss and choose to bat first. And yet there is a huge winning percentage of teams who actually did bat first. There's like a disconnect here that doesn't make any sense. And even when teams stopped winning more often when they were batting second, that didn't change anything, right? They still just kept doing it. 2013 was the last time in T20 cricket when teams actually decided to win the toss and bat first. And you can see after that moment, it changes pretty dramatically until we get to 2017. And this is absolutely fascinating, because by the time we get to 2017, essentially 75% of teams in T20 cricket are deciding that when they win the toss, they're going to bowl first. That's bizarre, right? And we really do need to take another look at this. Teams almost always chose to bowl here. Despite the fact that the win percentage of teams actually batting first is fine. It's not above 50% and it's not even quite 50%. But even so, these two don't match up at all. Like, why are teams deciding that you absolutely have to bowl first when batting first is like, okay? There are many reasons why teams bowl first, but the two biggest influences are obviously that when you bat first, you're not quite sure how hard you have to go. So it means that you can be dismissed chasing too many runs or end up being under par by being safe. And the other one is conditions. And by that, we mainly mean dew, which makes it almost impossible to defend runs because, the ball is wet at that point. But look at this. Even with those two factors that we all accept are true, the actual win percentage between batting first and batting second isn't that different. I mean, what we've done really is we've taken a 50-50 game and we've made it a 53-47 game. That isn't nothing, because you now have a 6% advantage just by winning the toss and deciding to bowl first. But also, as we showed you in 2017, it doesn't seem to actually correlate with the cricket that is being played at any one time. Since the start of 2023, international teams around the world have been batting first over 40% of the time. That's still not a lot, but in major leagues, it's so much lower. In this time period, teams have won the toss and batted first 37% of the time. Not much more than a third. Yet teams batting first have been winning over 47% of the time. Feels like a disconnect to me. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today. Test cricket is clearly the opposite of T20. The old Australian idiom of winning the toss and then thinking about what you're going to do before you just bat first automatically still largely holds up. Teams still do that today. And T20 cricket now is almost entirely opposite, and yet almost as automatic. The other thing is that it isn't exactly the same everywhere because, of course, pitches are slightly different. And you can see since the start of 2023, international teams are starting to actually win the toss and bat first a little bit more. But the vast majority of leagues are still in this area where it's about 2/3 of the times they just automatically bowl first. Then there's some real outliers. The IPL is certainly one,
And the CPL takes it to a whole nother level. This is where it actually shocks you if a team wins a toss and decides to bat first. So you would then assume that in the CPL, what we would be seeing here is the fact that teams who bat first never win. Wait a minute. Teams who bat first here seem to win at a very normal rate. So how is it possible when you win the toss? 9 times out of 10 you bowl first. If almost 50-50, you win first whether you bat or bowl first. I mean, come on. What, am I missing something here? Now, of course, the CPL is a little bit more dramatic than other leagues. But when you look at this all the way through, you'll see that winning the toss and batting first by league doesn't really make a lot of sense since the start of 2023. The Big Bash and international cricket is about the only time when the percentages are close to each other. The CPL we've already shown you, but the 100 is another one with a big disconnect, and the IPL as well. I mean, in the IPL, teams are winning more than 50% of the time when they bat first, and more than 75% of the time, teams are bowling first. Am I going crazy here? I think this one probably explains it the most. This is since 2013, and obviously things have changed a little bit of recent times. But the purple line here is how often teams choose to bat first, right? We saw this graphic before, and we also saw the win percentage batting first one before. But I've put them on the same graph now, just so that you see that there isn't really a correlation between these two. Teams just suddenly decided to start bowling first all the time, and the winning percentage hasn't changed all that much. It was a bit of a kickback and teams started deciding to bat first a little bit more. But then they stopped doing that again, despite the fact that batting first still seems to work roughly the same as it always has. This green line should be moving a lot more, but instead it's the purple one. This green line is the reality. The purple one is more a choice that people are making, and it is not matching reality.
Can you do some maths? So teams win the toss, right, and bat first 37% of the time. Okay? Now you're not going to be shocked at this. So 50% of the time, teams win the toss. That one's not that exciting. So this also means that 63% of the time you are sent in. Following me so far? Okay. So what if every time you win the toss, so instead of 50%, let's go with 100% of the time, you bat first. Yeah? That actually means that 50% of the time, you bat first. Because you're only going to win the toss half the time, right? And then 63% of the time you are sent in. So 63% of the time you are sent in, but that is only half the time. So we need to half 63 and we get 31.5. So if we add these two numbers, that means that 81.5% of the time you can bat first in all T20s if you want to, just by knowing this information. So of course that brings us back to our other number, 47.2. 47.2% of the time you win batting first. However, it is my theory that if you were to bat first 81.5% of the time, or just like a lot more, you would actually be much better at winning when you batted first than just 47.2%. For instance, your batters would understand how to set totals. They wouldn't be so obsessed with par. And your bowlers might also improve bowling with the wet, dewy ball because they're just doing it so much more. And the thing about this is still extreme. It's just taking the extreme completely to the other end, right? And you don't have to worry about your team chasing, because if you're an international team, these same players are going to play in leagues all around the world and they're going to be really good at chasing. And even if you have them in a franchise, batting second will still happen a lot. And again, they will play in other leagues where most of the teams are still going to be sending people in. So it means that all of your players are going to be used to chasing. So this comes back to my original point. As a side, you could actually play with the opposition's heads. And that means for your side that they would know what they were doing almost every single time they turned up. I mean, this is 4 out of 5, right? They're turning up to the ground knowing pretty much exactly what is going to happen. They're going to bat first. They're going to get used to it. They're going to get better at it. And at the very least, the opposition would now have to think hard, because they're going to work out what you want to do and they're going to have to change their plans. And they're not going to be prepared to bat first, because we know they very rarely choose to bat first. So you could actually upset their game plan. Also, if you actually still win 47% of the time when batting first, doesn't that also mean that setting a total and due are actually fairly small things to be overcome, not massive things? I mean, if due was a really big thing, wouldn't we see it in this number a lot more? So maybe it doesn't happen that much. And perhaps players now who've played so much white ball cricket are getting a lot more used to, setting targets. And of course, there are actual times when teams send you in that they shouldn't. Like during day-night games, when the sun is out, why would you want to send all your players out into the middle? Because they're going to get really tired. It's much better to put the opposition's fielding team out in the heat of the sun. And of course, we're just talking mathematics here. There are times when doing all this doesn't work. Like for instance, if your batting is just full of really great chasers, I don't know, you've got Michael Bevan, MS Dhoni, Kyron Pollard and Virat Kohli all together. Or conversely, if your bowling is really rubbish. But if you're in a league, you can actually set up your team so that they make par totals with the bat, and then you can put all of your money into bowling as your main strength, which would work very, very well on nets. It's also worth noting that bowlers are usually cheaper, so you might actually save some money. Oh, and obviously this is all a bit mad. No one would run a cricket team based on these kinds of things, except for the fact that they do. Because we know that this 63% mark over here does come from these kinds of conversations, right? Teams are talking about all this sort of stuff, and it's why we end up with a number like that. So if we're going to come up with a number like this based on pretty much algorithms, we could also do the opposite to upset it.
The real change seems to come around 2016. And I wondered if it was as simple as that was when a major team started doing it and having success. And you can see that since then, teams have been choosing to bat first 37% of the time and still winning at roughly 47% when going in up front. So what I wanted to look at was international sides. Usually when a trend goes global in T20 cricket, as this one clearly has, it starts in the leagues, but it is the international teams that really spread it. So if you have a look at the international sides, you'll see that Afghanistan, and of course we were going to mention them, they bat first more than any other team since the start of 2016. And then you've got Canada and Uganda. I think that's really interesting, and these are three outliers, and they're also three quite different sides. This is the other end, which I think is far more interesting. India bats first the second least, which follows, of course, because of the IPL. But England almost never bat first. England don't even think of batting first. England have only batted first when it's been an accident. And what I started thinking about is almost for all of these sides here, isn't this a bit weird? Because most of the games that these teams are going to be playing are bilaterals. And they know that when they finally get to the World Cup, the coin toss is about 50%. So wouldn't you want to prepare yourself by making sure that your team actually played as many times batting first as they did batting second? That does not appear to be the case, and that's not how these teams look at it at all. I would much rather lose a bunch of bilaterals, but make sure that my team is very good at setting a target and chasing a target, than just making sure we win a bunch of games that don't mean all that much and get to a World Cup and we are not prepared. But this graph doesn't include win percentage. Shall we have a look at win percentage as well? Because I think this is really, really interesting. So here you have Afghanistan choosing to bat first more than any other side, and you can see it suits their game style. Again, with Canada, it makes sense, and with Uganda, it makes sense. But the interesting thing is that there are a lot of teams here who don't choose to bat first very often and are actually really good when they bat first. I think Nepal is one of the more interesting sides here, right? No one thinks of them as a mega strong team, and yet when they bat first, they're really, really good, and they almost never decide to bat first. Am I missing something here? But just to come back to Afghanistan for a moment, remember, in the World Cup semi-final, they did choose to bat first. Now, of course, South Africa has also said that they would have batted first on this. And you can see that South Africa is all the way down here. So that was obviously a pitch that both teams thought they should bat first. And of course, instead of winning that one, Afghanistan lost it. But batting first had worked very well for them. And the reason I go back to Afghanistan here is really so we can go to the other end, because the other team that won the toss in the World Cup semi-final was England. And of course, you could see from here, they were never going to bat first. They weren't even thinking about batting first. They may not know how to say, we'll have a bat. And yet you come up to their win percentage and they're pretty good when they bat first. Maybe not as dominant as when they chase, but they're still winning over 50% of their games. However, by being this dogmatic with how they do it, they're letting every other team in the World Cup know that they don't want to bat first. That's a huge advantage if you're playing England. But in the World Cup semi-final, they of course played India, who's the other team who never chooses to bat first. Which again is weird because look at how good they are when they bat first. And we now know how good they are when they bat first because they just beat England doing it. But because England is the outlier here, I really wanted to look at them directly and just look at how often they actually win the toss and bat first. And you can see that when they weren't very good, they still didn't do it that often. Then they had this little period where they were like, yeah, we're going to win the toss, we're going to bat first. That's going to be our thing. And then they got really good at T20 cricket. And what the hell is going on here? That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years where they did not win the toss and bat first in a T20 international. England's cricket is so algorithmic that they looked at the fact that they would be a 53% chance of winning if they bowled first. And they just bowled first again and again and again and again. And they didn't really round out their game in the way that other teams have. And this isn't the team that invented the theory. It had been bumbling around T20 cricket for a long time. But this is the team that really showed it to the rest of the world. And when they had success with it, other teams did start to follow. But I think you already know what I'm going to show you here. So the blue is the graph that you just saw. And the orange is how often they win when they bat first. So you can see in here, there were some years when they did bat first and they didn't actually lose a game. They did have other years where they struggled a little bit more batting first. But they're certainly not particularly bad at batting first looking at this graphic. And we already showed you before, they win more than 50% of their games when they do it. But my question is, would they be even better at it if they batted first more often, especially in games that don't matter all that much? Why are they not rounding out their game? How does this help them when they get to a World Cup and they're not going to be able to chase every single time? Honestly, I have always thought throughout the history of cricket that in tests, teams bat first too often. And in T20 cricket, I now think teams bowl first too often. And in this semi-final, it is quite interesting that England and Afghanistan both won the toss and they did what they always do and they still both lost. So there are no right answers at a certain point. And had they reversed their normal themes, maybe they still would have lost. But I do think just winning the toss and bowling all the time, it doesn't make you the best T20 side you can beat. Having said that, it may not make as much of a difference when everyone is making the exact same decision, right? South Africa is in the final, and this doesn't make sense to me. And India is in the final, and this doesn't make sense to me. Honestly, the more I look at this sort of stuff, the more I start to think to myself that T20 cricket has a mass psychosis. Win toss, must bowl. Win toss, must bowl. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.